cut you off. We are so excited to unveil for you today the Blanche Castleman Digital Scrapbook. I'm Susie Booth. This is Patrick Randall. We're very excited to be here today, and thank you so much for coming out to experience this with us. So for those of you who might not be aware, we are the LIS 462 Digital Libraries class. And basically the class works with the college archives to digitize scrapbooks in the collection and make them accessible online. This project is called the Notable Women of Simmons College Digital Scrapbook Collection, and we are celebrating our 10th year at our 15th scrapbook in the collection. So we're very excited. Candy has been at the helm since its inception, working with Jason Wood, who is also here with us at the College Archives. And we've been working the whole semester towards this project, and Patrick's going to tell you a little bit more about our process.
So before we get into the actual scrapbook itself, I'd like to introduce all of the committees who made this possible, who put all the work into creating this thing. And when I mention the committee name, if all the individuals in that committee would stand up briefly and be recognized. We're going to start with our program manager, Maggie Anderson. From the beginning, Maggie did a lot of research on different program management techniques and methods and shared that with the class in the form of a white paper. She also did a lot of testing of various program management software and eventually settled on a piece of software called Clocking It, which she used to track all of the many tasks and deadlines that faced all the committees. So she really had a bird's eye view of everything that was going on and carried the vision of this scrapbook forward, made sure all the various committees were working synchronously, and made sure that we were meeting all of our big non-negotiable deadlines. She also was, from time to time, a sort of free agent who lent her services to various committees when they were in a pinch, so that was much appreciated. The next committee is the Systems Committee. Stan, please. It was chaired by Michelle Montalbano. They spent many long nights making sure that this website that you're about to see works. Everything from the back-end design to selecting the platform, making sure that the front end looked nice. They did all the ingestion of data and images and really put together a beautiful product, as you'll see. And if anything malfunctions during this presentation, blame lies. They did a great job. Digitization, chaired by Amanda Lenz. This committee really had their work cut out for them up front. As soon as the scrapbook was disbound and ready to be scanned, they created a massive inventory of every single page and object within the scrapbook, and then they assigned different objects to individuals of the class to be scanned. And then once those were all scanned, they made sure that each image was a quality image master file and work file, JPEG, so that we would have really great images for our scrapbook. They held us to a high standard, as I can attest, because Zelda made me redo my images, but I don't hold that against me. Content Committee. Chaired by Chris Sears. The Content Committee researched a lot of the historical background for Blanche, the period that she lived in, and the events that were going on in the United States and in the world. And they supplemented the scrapbook itself with some great materials, which we'll show you in a few minutes, including an interactive timeline showing both events from Blanche's life and the history of Simmons and the history of the country at large, and as well as some materials for school teachers to use material directly from the scrapbook as primary sources and didactic materials for students. So really great features that we'll show you pretty soon. The Environmental Scan Committee. Chaired by Priya. This was another committee that had a lot of work up front in the project. Basically, as soon as we had the scrapbook, they ran around to look at other digital projects that were similar to what we were hoping to create, including previous Notable Women's scrapbooks, and identified features and content that we wanted to incorporate into our own scrapbook. And then they created a very comprehensive survey, which they gave to the class after just a few days, really. Collected all the results and then made a set of recommendations that would allow us to shape the vision for our scrapbook and to all be on the same page for how we wanted it to look and what we wanted to convey to our audience. So really nice work, and I think they did that in record time. So, marketing committee. Here, Susie. All of the overall feel, the branding for our scrapbook, the beautiful logo that you see here in the top, all was done by marketing. The invitations that you got, for those of you who are our guests here, were done by marketing. They also, a week ago, put on a really great panel that was well attended here at Simmons on digital scrapbooks and digital preservation. Maggie was one of our panelists. Candy was one. Peter Botticelli, a professor here of digital preservation, and Tom Blake from the Boston Public Library. So a really nice event that they put on to sort of, as a prelude to this, and also to spread the word about the type of work that we're doing and the type of work that's going on in LAS programs and in our profession more generally. Lastly, Preservation Committee. They're not the last one. Preservation. So preservation researched a lot of the best practices and guidelines that shaped how we would preserve all of this content, both our images and our metadata, all the material that went into this scrapbook for the future. So that it's not simply sitting on a server where it's vulnerable. They collected all of that. They used best practices to determine how it would be preserved in what files, and then they've saved it all on an external hard drive so that, God forbid, if something happens to our website here, all this material is still preserved for future use. And I'm sorry, I didn't want to leave you guys out. I know I said that preservation was our last committee, but rights management. Also our smallest committee, so co-chaired by Kyle and Vicki. Rights management researched a lot of the legal factors that would affect how we could display some of this material, how it can be used by users who visit the website, and they created some really carefully constructed legal language and to make sure that we were appropriately using copyright and fair use and all of that. And they did that for every single item, every single object in the scrapbook, which, as you'll see in a minute, is a monumental task. So they did a lot of research to make sure that we were respecting fair use and copyright. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the physical scrapbook.
Evaluation. This one.
What committee were you on?
Another oversight, sorry about that. My committee, chaired by Irina, metadata, scripted metadata. So what we were responsible for is selecting controlled vocabularies, including Library of Congress subject headings and the art and architecture thesaurus. We also created a pretty extensive manual to guide the entire class in metadata creation. And once all the metadata was created by individuals from the class, we were responsible for doing quality control on that metadata, a task which is never truly over. But that's descriptive metadata. And now I think I've covered it.
Evaluation.
Usability. Right. I think I missed an entire page. Evaluation and usability. Could you guys stand up? I owe a lot of people apologies. Chaired by Jahan. Evaluation and usability, unlike a couple of the other committees, had most of their work at the latter end of the project. What they did was snagged a few unsuspecting Simmons undergrads, took them into the Simmons Usability Lab, conducted usability testing to make sure that our interface was intuitive, to make sure that our site was easily navigable, and they had some great recommendations which they gave to the systems committee to implement on how to make our site accessible and usable for people who may not have a lot of familiarity with this type of digital scrapbook. So really great work that they did too. And now, scrapbook. So this was one of those, if you've ever seen one, these early 20th century scrapbooks, they're like this big, weigh like 10 pounds, really large. Ours had 127 pages, so it was, I think, the largest to date of any of the notable women's scrapbooks that have been digitized. It also had 16 loose items that were either originally belonged to a page or were inserted between pages. So Jason over at the Simmons Archives unbound it for us to make it easier to scan, and then the scanning process began. So all of those, at this point, all of those committees that I've just introduced to you started working, some simultaneously on different aspects of this. We wanted to get it scanned as quickly as possible so that we could start doing test ingests into the platform, into the system, to make sure everything was working smoothly. We also, at this time, started developing the metadata standards that would be used. The digitization committee had their hands full inventorying all of this stuff to make sure people had their scanning assignments. Once it was all scanned, the systems committee, who had been working furiously this whole time to make sure that the back end was working properly, had the whole class go into the tech lab one day, and in one afternoon we uploaded all the material, all the images, all the metadata, and they did it in such a way that it was as automated as possible, so that rather than manually assigning metadata to individual objects, it was all in a CSV file, it was all collated, and each object had its individual identifier, unique identifier. So it went really smoothly, and we worked out a couple kinks, but that takes us really to the past week. The site went live on Wednesday, so that was, and it worked. And the preservation committee, meanwhile, has been making sure that all this stuff will stay safe, as I mentioned before, on an external hard drive so that it's preserved for the future. And I'm going to turn it back to Susie to talk about our actual digital scrapbook.
So now, the woman of the hour, Blanche Castleman White. So to give you a little bit more information on Blanche, Blanche was born in 1897 in Rochester, New York. She attended West High School in Rochester, while she actually made a scrapbook there as well. So we actually had one member of our class, Vicky, that's her hometown, that during Thanksgiving went down, saw the scrapbook, and it's really incredible. So if you're ever in that neck of the woods, you could check out Blanche's high school scrapbook there. Most importantly, she came to Simmons College in 1915, where she earned her Bachelor of Science in Library Science. So Blanche is a fellow alum, just like we're going to be in a little while. And you can hear the anticipation of my voice. And so we're really excited to be able to work on Blanche's scrapbook in particular, because it was really insightful to see the Library Science program through her point of view. She was involved in many clubs, but most importantly, she was involved in the Dramatic Club, which when we take you through the scrapbook a little bit further, you'll see that quite evidently by how many different theaters and productions she went to during her time at college. She graduated in 1919 and soon thereafter became a librarian at Jefferson Junior High School in Rochester and became a wife and mother. So that's Blanche. So to situate her a little bit more in the greater context of the period that she was in, we created a very beautiful interactive timeline, as Patrick was describing earlier. So now, using open source tools, we created this timeline for you to not only receive more context about the times that Blanche was living in, but also to give you the full trajectory of the project as well. So this includes Simmons College history, Boston history, US history, world history, specifically World War I, and it takes us right into the notable women of Simmons College scrapbook collection and our particular project of Blanche Castleman Digital Digital Scrapbook. So it gives you the full overview, which there is so much information, as you can see below here at the timeline, that you should definitely explore further on your own. There's the scrapbook. We lived on it. So at this point, I'm going to take you to the home page, and we're actually going to start exploring the site a little bit more in depth. Now, I would like to point out that the page, the website is fully responsive, so if you have your mobile device and you're kind of curious to see what it looks like, by all means, please take it out and kind of play along with us as we take you through everything.
Feel free to use these computers too, they're set up at every table.
So the way that we've set this up, I'll direct you to the navigation bar. So we have our scrapbook, and there are a series of ways for you to be able to browse through the scrapbook, page by page, items, subjects, and types, which we're going to take you through in a little bit. We have a tab on Blanche's World, which is where we just directed you to see the timeline and further historical context about Blanche and the world that she lived in. We also have information for teachers. and our content committee developed lesson plans for a variety of students so that you can use this scrapbook in a very didactic manner as well. And we also have a tab for About the Project to learn more about the process that Patrick was describing earlier. So with that being said on the nav bar, we anticipate that there's going to be some high traffic on particular parts of the website, so we've included these links at the bottom to make that a little bit easier and direct you there. The first being library science and women's education. That's going to take you to one of the lesson plans that Content developed and that we're going to explore specifically later on. The World of Blanche will take you back to her historical context and the interactive timeline, and the Making of Digital Blanche will tell you more about the project as well. So these are all features on the navigation bar that makes it a lot easier for people when they're trying to get familiar with the site that they can be directed here as well. We also anticipate that people know what scrapbooks are, they've seen physical scrapbooks, and they might want to navigate the scrapbook online as they would physically if they were at the college archives. So we've included right on the home page a link to go and to flip through page by page so you can simulate the experience of navigating a physical scrapbook digitally. So we'll take you there. So it'll direct you first to the cover, and then you can actually flip through using these navigation bars at the top, left or right, to move forwards and backwards in the scrapbook. But you can also scroll down a little bit lower, and you can browse through thumbnails in this way as well. So that if you're looking for something to kind of catch your eye or interest you in that way, you don't have to flip through individually, you can also scan through. And we also included a jump to page feature as well. So if there's a specific page you remember that you wanted to go back to, and you don't want to have to sit and scroll through everything, you can enter that specific number in down here. And we recommend that you hit the go button. That's how it will take you there, not enter. Little tip. And then it will direct you there. And now Patrick is going to take you through some of the search features.
So if rather than browse, you prefer to search for specific items on this site, we have a simple search bar up here, but also I want to draw your attention to this little help link over here. Simmons Systems created this really great set of tips and advice on how to use search most effectively to get the most precise results. And so they have some general tips on how to search for content, but they also explain things like Boolean searching and truncation for people who might not be familiar with that, as well as advice for how to browse, how to search by dates, how to use the advanced search. So a nice feature for people who may not be familiar with all the advanced search capability of the scrapbook. So if I want to use the simple search on this site and I want to look for things like programs, you can see that this gives us a lot of recall, but not a lot of precision. There are 91 programs in this scrapbook, which is amazing. Blanche went to lots of concerts, lots of theatrical productions, lots of events at Simmons College, which have their own programs. So if I want to narrow my search a little more, I can go to the advanced search. Here I can search by keyword again, but I can also narrow by things like subject. So if I want to look at programs for only the theatrical productions that she attended, I can narrow that down. I can add other fields too if I want to be even more precise. And this time when I search, I see only those programs, still a lot of them, for theatrical productions that Blanche attended. So if I want to click on one here, now I'm taken to the individual object. And here on the right I see all the metadata that's been created for this individual object. We use Dublin Core as our metadata standard, both because it's simple and highly interoperable with other standards and platforms, but also because it's natively supported by Omeka, which is the platform that Systems chose to host the scrapbook. Most of the fields are self-explanatory, like title and description, but we also have things like type. So in this case, we have, this is a controlled field. We have only 3 types in our scrapbook: text, still image, and physical object. We also have relation. This refers back to the page from which this object was originally taken, and a unique identifier, which belongs to every object in this scrapbook. So the way this is constructed is BCL stands for Blanche Castleman Link. 018 is the page number from the original scrapbook. 03 is the number of the object on that page going clockwise. And if it were a multi-page item, it would have a different letter for each page, so A, B, C, etc. And these are all JPEGs because our master files are TIFFs that are stored elsewhere. Coverage refers to the geographic place that this individual item is associated with. So in this case, it was a theatrical production at the Colonial Theater, which is here in Boston, so our coverage is Boston, Mass. I mentioned earlier that there are individual rights statements for every object in here. In this case, there are no restrictions on this particular item, but other items did have restrictions, and so the rights committee had to craft these carefully worded statements to reflect how these materials can be used. A nice feature of Omeka is that it automatically generates citations for every individual object in the scrapbook. And so if somebody wants to cite this in a paper or presentation, it's really easy to do that just by looking at the item page. The other nice feature about this metadata is that much of it is links. And so if I want to see browse by subject directly from a link or browse by formats, I can click on any of these things and it will take me to all the other items with that particular subject heading. I can also, if I want to see the original page from which this object was taken, I can click on the relation there, and I see both the full page as well as the two other objects that were included on that page. So our philosophy for this was we want somebody to be able to navigate from any point in the scrapbook to any other place in the scrapbook. And I think we've accomplished that pretty well. At this point, I'm going to turn it back to Susie for talking about some more specific browsing features.
So now we realize that if you're not very acquainted with the site, you might not already have a very specific search request in mind. So apart from just being able to browse through the scrapbook, we also want to be able to browse specifically different items and other information in the scrapbook as well. So to that end, you can go to the scrapbook page and browse page by page is the feature we showed you before, but you can also browse by items, subjects, and types. So to show you what this looks like, if we wanted to browse by types, let's say, here are all the different formats that Patrick was just describing in the metadata that we have available in the collection. So here, if we're interested in looking at drawings, for example, it'll take us specifically to the drawings there, and then we can continue our process or refine or try the search if that's something that we're interested in. Let's try something else. We can also look at, what's an interesting one, dance cards. Blanche had a little bit of a social life, as we all do in college. And so here are all the dance cards in the collection, and then you can continue your investigation. But we can also browse by subjects. Here we have a ton of subjects, and so it's very helpful that we have this alphabet at the top to be able to direct you a little bit closer to what you're looking for. So if we were interested in poetry, we can go here, and now we browse by subject, and here's all of the things that are of poeticism in the collection. And let's try something else. If we want to keep things light, let's try communicable diseases. Diseases had a huge impact in the early 20th century on not just the American psyche, but in the world as well. And so to this end, the content committee, when they designed their lesson plans for teachers, they made sure to include polio as a lesson plan so that you could explore the scrapbook a little bit further in light of this epidemic. So what's interesting about the lesson plan here is that it not only demonstrates the effect of the U.S. polio epidemic, but it also describes the importance of becoming familiar with using primary source materials with students and acquainting them with what that research process looks like. Now, we as library science students know all about the importance of primary source materials in the research process. So it's interesting that we also have curriculum designed around library science programs. Blanche was a library science student. Simmons has an incredible library science program. And so this is a really interesting feature because it comes up frequently over the course of the scrapbook about tests and all sorts of little tidbits about the library science program in the early 20th century. So here, we've directed you to the lesson plan on library science. And here, again, the significance is, yes, that you can explore specifically polio and library science programs, but what our content committee was very interested in was acquainting students of various different ages with the significance of primary source research, which is what we really are all about when we digitize this scrapbook and make it available to everyone online. So now that we've taken you through the scrapbook, we want to take a little step back. And as we explained earlier, the whole process and with how many committees involved, it's really been quite an undertaking. So we took some time to actually calculate the cost to see just how much did we spend creating this digital library. So I'm coming out for this. So we calculated the digital library cost only on salaries, so we did not include benefits or office space or overhead, just so you could keep that in mind. Roughly, everyone in the class earned between $22 to $24, with the exception of Maggie, our project manager. She earned $30. Not trying to get So now, annually, if we were working full-time, 40 hours a week, our salaries would range anywhere from $43,000 to $50,000, right? Right. So, but if we're just calculating the cost of this specific digital library that we spent this semester, each committee would earn roughly a range between $500 to $8,500. There's also a lot of non-committee costs as well, and these include the scanning, the post-processing, embedding metadata, ingesting it into the system, all of the process that Patrick described earlier. That would cost $4,000 to do all of that work. So combined, if we took each committee cost with the non-committee expenses, this digital library cost $35,000. Which is pretty incredible.
Simmons is thankful that they have us for free.
Yeah.
We want to acknowledge some specific people for their contributions to this, but before that, we want to open the floor to any questions about the scrapbook, about Blanche, about anything that you've seen in this presentation. Yes?
I'm kind of interested in the rights management. What would have been protected in this scrapbook?
I'm going to direct
Direct
you to
you.
the rights management committee.
Sure, I'll take it. So what we looked at primarily, because the scrapbook was primarily created before, what was the date, 1923? 1923 is the cutoff, basically, for when copyright law changed. So everything that was published before 1923 is in the public domain and can be used freely without any rights restrictions at all. So, for instance, that program right there for the Hippodrome and the Hollis Street Theater program, those would both be in the public domain because they were published items. Anything that's unpublished is protected by the length of the life of the creator, so until their death plus 70 years. And since we don't know how long that is for many of the creators of the items for the unpublished items, and for also Blanche herself died in 1980, so her items would still be covered. And since they were unpublished, those would still be protected under copyright law. So we had to put those under a statement that said that we are allowed to use them because of through fair use and for educational reasons and preservation. Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes?
Were there any living heirs?
Yes. I think Susie can speak to that.
Yes. With the help of the content committee, we were able to, the word that's coming to mind is track down, and that seems really creepy. We were able to locate the grandson of Blanche Castleman Link, found him on LinkedIn, which is kind of like a pun situation. And so I reached out to him, and he was very enthusiastic to hear that his grandmother's scrapbook was being digitized. He wasn't able to be with us today, but he was very excited to hear about it. And so there are members of the Castleman Link family that are out there, and I'm sure would love to be directed to the site. So for that reason alone, it's a really incredible opportunity.
Question.
Yeah.
Do you have any favorite items that you've come across in the scrapbook? Anything that you think is especially interesting to share with the audience?
You must have one. Well, I think there may have been a class favorite. Other spelling. So this was a fake mustache that was part of a costume that Blanche wore. She was playing the character of Justin Rawson in a production of Mrs. Bumpstead Lay. And I don't know why she included it. It's a little bit strange, but this was a frequent topic of conversation while we were. It raises some great questions, like how do you describe and digitize a thing like a fake mustache? So it presented some unique challenges.
And it's also interesting from a context perspective because this is the era of vaudeville. So the fact that Blanche Castleman came to college dressed in drag, essentially, and performed this piece is a really great tidbit about what makes Simmons College so great in the context of women's history.
question is for the systems committee. I'm just wondering if they could describe the process of moving from Omeka, like what tools in addition to that or on top of that did they use to get to this endpoint that is so beautiful and so well put together?
Yeah, so Omeka, I mean, it's just inherently fantastic, and it comes with, there's like multiple themes you can choose from, and so a lot of our time was just spent in web design, just hacking the heck out of the theme. For the timeline, there's a thing called Timeline.js. It's like very user-friendly, easy to use, so we just plop that in. We used for a lot of our sliders a thing called BX Slider, and that's an open source tool that's it's like very responsive and really good for displaying a lot of media. And that's what we use both on the home page as like sort of a gallery display, and also for the sets of thumbnails for people to slide through. And I think those were the big points in terms of tools that we use. Most of it was just a lot of time in CSS.
Okay.
There was a lot of work there.
Great. And the process by which we got all of the items into Omeka, we mentioned the CSV earlier, but Nick created a tremendously complicated concatenate function.
Oh, that was fantastic.
It was we knew about concatenation as the solution to our problem because some of the items had 1 to up to 8 pages, and we needed to make sure that we would be able to create the file path for each item with variable circumstances within the pages. So we had this excellent concatenate function. As Patrick mentioned, we were able to do all of that in an afternoon with very few glitches. So I think that was another major step in the process. We each sort of occupied different roles. Anna was the fixer. Anytime there was something that broke unexpectedly, she found the solution to it. I sort of roamed around and QC'd everything and spent more time in the HTML. But yeah.
Omeka really is like very on the admin end user-friendly and accessible, as well as on the in terms of ingesting and harvesting metadata really well.
Can I just add, I think one of the things people don't know Omeka would be interested in is this is the result of a lot of knowledge and skill, but if you didn't have this collectivity of knowledge and skill, you could still get a decent looking result out of Omeka. Not this good.
Any other questions? Okay. At this time, I'd like to acknowledge some individuals who made this possible and contributed in different ways. There are quite a few of them, so if you hold your applause till the end, that'd be great. First, Peter Botticelli, assistant professor here at Simmons, who was on our panel last week. Tom Blake from the BPL, Grandma Cafe, which provided our delicious refreshments there in the back. Michael Kerr, director of catering at Simmons College. Thank you. Linnea Johnson, manager of SLIS Technology. Travis Lilleberg, curriculum support developer.
Woo.
Lauren Murray, manager of conferences and special events here at Simmons. Stephen Ortega, associate professor of history here at Simmons. Rong Tang, in charge of the usability lab, let us use that, it's very kind. The technology lab staff who supported us in numerous ways throughout this process. Thornton's Fenway Bar and Grill. I think they should be thanking us. The usability staff here at Simmons. Nikki Vanderpool, director, conferences and special events at Simmons. Stephen Vandersky, creator of BX Slider, one of the open source tools that we mentioned. Tom Scheinfeld, creator of Omeka, a great open source tool. Jason Wood, our college archivist. And all of the people who contributed through GoFundMe to host this great gala that we have this morning. We raised a record amount of funds in the amount of $800. So that was unprecedented and allowed us to have a little champagne and some other refreshments. So thank you to each who donated for this event. And last but certainly not least, Candy, would you join us here at the front?
Let me up there.
Yes.
Shortly, but I just want class. I always say in this class that I basically just wind them up and then I let them go and they run off and they do it all. In this class,
Not true.
yes it is. Even more than most. I mean, really a little prodding here and there, a little gentle guidance, but each committee did an incredible amount of work and they really all labored long and hard to bring you this, and I'm just so impressed with this class. So thank you, class. And thank you for the powers. All right.
And thank you all for coming. Please continue to enjoy refreshments and some music, which I think we'll put back on, and stick around for a little while and talk. Thanks.